I first met Frank in the Dismembered Tennesseans, I guess, back in the 70s, maybe the mid-70s. And I was trying to get started in the music business, and they were doing shows. They were in the music business, and it was mostly local type entertainment. And we really weren't that competitive with each other, or rather complemented each other in a way. I mean, a lot of times they couldn't do something, and they'd throw it out to me, and sometimes I couldn't do something, I'd throw it out to them, and we kind of shared some work, but we became friends, and I was so fascinated with his work on the microphone. He was such a, he was so full of life and such a character. I just was mesmerized by his control on the microphone, how he could just take over a crowd and just all of a sudden everybody's paying attention to him, you know. And so many times when you're playing music, you start playing and people start talking, and depending on what that venue is, they're talking or drinking, they're having a good time, it's a party or whatever. But Frank could always overcome that and just cut right to the chase, and he would just have them eating out of his hand in just a matter of a few stories that he would tell at the microphone, and just his command of the microphone just amazed me, and I always just admired him so much for that. And as a person, he was a really nice man. He was a nice person to me, always.
Oh, thank you so much there, friends and neighbors, and it's great to be back on the Mountain Opry. Radio is a great way to get to the people. But I told the boys before we came out here tonight, I said, boys, we're going to have to be good because we don't have our looks going for us tonight. So I hope out there in Radio Land it sounds a whole lot better than it does back here on this side of the microphone so far. Fletcher Bright did the lead vocals on that song, and Fletcher, I'm going to have to say, Fletcher, I never heard you sing any better, and that's kind of a shame when you think about it. Well, sir, here we are. That first song is the song that we sang to clear our throats, and the next song is a song that we suddenly thought of the other day. Nowadays, as old as we're getting, we can't learn any new songs because we just can't remember the words. But I will say this, getting old has one advantage to it. It's getting to the place now that we're remembering some songs that we had forgotten. And we got one of those songs we're going to do for you now. It's an old Homer and Jethro number that we did many years ago, and we quit because it seems like nobody particularly wanted to hear it. Thought we'd pull it out again and see if this song's time has come. It's one that's called Groundhog.
Frank and I used to, we'd hear good stories, you know, and he'd pass them on to me, and he'd tell me, you can't tell this within 50 miles of Chattanooga. He said, this is my material. And so I'd say, well, okay, and then I'd have a good joke, and I'd tell him, and I'd say, oh, you can't tell it within 50 miles of Chattanooga. And that was our little agreement. And one time he and the Dismembered Tennesseans were playing in Ringgold, Georgia, at the train depot, and evidently they had been riding Fletcher unmercifully about these Birkenstock shoes, or some brand shoes that he had on that were a little bit different than what the normal footwear is, you know, for band members. You know, he came in with some Birkenstock sandals on or something, and maybe some white socks, I don't remember. But anyway, when I walked up to them, they had just been doing unmerciful treatment of him about his shoes, I guess. And so when I walked up, I said, Fletcher, I said, how long did the doctor say you had to wear them shoes? And of course, Frank and the whole band just broke up because they had been digging him about it all day, I guess. And so Frank said, oh, that's good, oh, that's choice. I said, well, Frank, you can't use that on stage today, because I said, I may use that when I go on later on. I was going on after they did. And so he said, okay, I'll use the 50-mile rule. We won't tell that within 50 miles of Chattanooga. And he walked right out on the stage, and they did their first number, and he stepped up to the microphone and looked at Fletcher, and he said, Fletcher, how long did the doctor tell you you had to wear them shoes?
The next fella up tonight is named Fletcher Bright. He, for the third straight year, has failed to be nominated as one of Loveman's 10 best dressed men. He's got on a fine new hat there, I'll have to say. He is getting spiffed up some, but I guess I'd have to say that country musicians, when they grow old, they begin to wear hats because their hair begins to thin out on them, and it's a way to get around that thing. Although I will say Fletcher has come across a very fine but very expensive hair restoring compound that he's using on his hair now.
What is it?
Well, you should have seen him 3 weeks ago. And I would say by this time next month, Fletcher Bright will be the fellow they call the bushy-headed fiddle player. Fletcher's going to come up and play this next number for us on his magic violin. Fletcher, as you know, is the fellow who, for the last 40 years, has been playing his fiddle upside down. That is to say, when his bow goes up, all the other bows in the nation go down. And when all of the other bows go down, his bow is the one that's going up. But he's done pretty well at it. And Fletcher, if you would, come on and tell these folks what you're going to do for them
all these people
here next.
Appreciate all the
sure
fine
they're
things
all
you're saying. And I'd like to say that you have this audience eating out of the palm of your hand.
And now then, folks, it's come time for us to sing our song. In every show, there ought to be one song in the whole program that nobody wanted to hear but the fellas in the band. And we've come to that song. There are many of you that might have something else you'd like to be doing along about now, and this would be an excellent song for you to do it to. It takes about 3 minutes, and if you don't make it back, why, you're not going to really be missing that much. It's a song about life in general, about a fella that had some problems in particular. Like all old country songs, it tells a real sad story and requires a painful expression on the faces of the entertainers. And sorry you folks out there in radio land can't see our expressions, but if you were here, you would agree that that is a country music expression. So it's going to be an old song called "Don't This Road Look Rough and Rocky."
I had asked Frank and McDonald and Fletcher Bright to come and be guests on the Cowboy Jubilee radio show. And Fletcher was going to bring his fiddle, and Frank was, with the ALS, was incapacitated about playing the guitar. So he asked me to bring my guitar and said, "You and Fletcher can do a tune or two or whatever." And I said, "Well, okay, we'll do that." But I said, "I need to get you there at 2 o'clock. You know, I have a technician there that works at WSMC, and he will need to." The students, and they have classes, so I wanted to be on time. So anyway, I kept waiting for him, and about 10 or 15 minutes went by 2 o'clock, and of course Fletcher had taken on the role of Frank's chauffeur and had the little chauffeur's hat, and he'd go get the van and go pick Fletcher up anytime he needed a ride. And such a good friend that he had in Fletcher Bright. It was great. He would go and pick him up anywhere he wanted to go. So they were about 15 minutes late, but so I went outside the radio station and I looked and I saw the van, and I could see Fletcher in there with the little hat on, and I could see Frank through the back window, and they would go down past the radio station and went down by Little Debbie Parkway there in Abson, and they go down that way, and then I'd see them come back, and about 10 minutes would go by, and I guess they were trying to get directions, and they came back again, and then again one more time, about 3 times, and along about 2:30, I called them and said, "Hey, where are you guys at?" They said, "Well, we're trying to find the place." I said, "We think we know where it is." I said, "Well, you've passed me about 3 or 4 times. And I said, "I'm up on the hill up here." So finally they came back, came in the radio station. And of course Frank was in this wheelchair apparatus in the back compartment of the van, and Fletcher gets out of the van with his little hat on and runs around and opens the door up, slides it open for Frank. And Frank immediately says, "Well," he said, "I tried to tell my chauffeur friend here that it's got to be the building with all the antennas on it," but he wouldn't stop. He wanted to. He was still looking around. But anyway, it was funny. They were at each other all the time and kidding around with each other, and just as best of friends. But it was so funny that I tried to tell him, you know, it had to be the building with all the antennas on it. So that was a funny little story that I had. And when we got on the air, we told that story, so it was funny. And they came, and you know, Frank was such a good he was so good on the microphone. I think the day that they were my guests, I normally play 14 to 15 songs during the program. I think that day we probably didn't play 5 songs the whole day. We played a little Western swing to kick it off, and then we got right into some conversation, and Fletcher played a couple of fiddle tunes, and that was it. But Frank carried the show just about the whole time with his funny stories and his command of the microphone. He was just great at it. It really was.
Frank, there's a lady just a minute ago cornered me out there. I believe she's standing out there in the foyer there. Her name's Ruth Wood. She wanted to know when y'all were going to be playing up there at that lingerie shop or whatever it was.
Earl, it's not a lingerie shop. Ordinarily, people at our shows want to know where they can hear us next. Generally, the show that we're doing is the last one on our books. We only book them one at a time, apparently, for whatever reason. You can ordinarily shoot at a calendar and hit 12 of our open dates, but we do have a show coming up.
At a lingerie shop?
It's not in a lingerie department, Earl. It's in a perfume department.
Well, the ladies will be just as happy with that.
We'll be playing this next Sunday from 2:30 until 3:30 in the fragrance department, they call it nowadays. It's not the perfume department. We'll be playing in the fragrance department at Loveman's Department Store out at Hamilton Place Mall this next Sunday from 2:30 until 3:30.
Did they feel bad because Fletcher didn't make it? Is that the reason they invited you?
It is a way of making up for it. We're going to be kicking off a big sale that they've got on bluegrass perfume that's out there. And I can't wait to see what it smells like. But I'm serious, folks. We're going to be out there. We're going to be out at Hamilton Place Mall at Loveman's Department Store this next Sunday, and hope we'll see as many of you as possible out there. Right now, we're going to do for you our hymn for the night. Last time we were up here, Earl sort of sprang one on us there and said that one of his listeners wanted us to do How Great Thou Art. I don't know why she thought we could do it, but somehow or another we stumbled through it and got through before the audience, I think. We thought and got here tonight. Earl said, just try it one more time. And so this is the one more time that we're going to try this number. It's really a beautiful number and deserves a whole lot more than what we can do for it. But we're going to try it one more time, one that's called How Great Thou Art.
I think it's kind of how they got in the newspaper business, was print material for the home stores, maybe, is how that came down. I don't really know, but he was active in the music business and working for the paper when I sort of gotten to know him there. And I remember the first time I ever saw Frank McDonald was they were playing at the Chattanooga Choo-Choo, and I think they were playing for the Tennessee Municipal League, which is mayors from all the cities across Tennessee. And of course, there's a lot of vanity in the room, I guess, with all those mayors there. You know, a lot of important people, and there's a lot of talking going on. And I tell you what, Frank came out there and hit the stage. And before he did, though, I noticed he had a little briefcase, and in this briefcase was a sport coat, and it was a kind of coat that you need to hang on a hanger. I mean, I don't know what the material was. It may have been a cotton sport coat. I don't know, but he had it all wadded up and turned inside out, and just had mashed it all to pieces and put it in this briefcase and shut the lid. Well, that was one of his props that he used, was that old sport coat. And he took that sport coat out of that briefcase and just kind of shook it out and put it on. And he looked like that he had been riding on a Greyhound bus all day and had just got off the bus. That's what he looked. I mean, he had that was his appearance. And he walked out on the stage there with all the conversation going on and everything. They had a nice introduction, but still there was conversation and glasses rattling and dishes and stuff. And within 5 minutes, he had complete command of that group, and he had them rolling in the aisles. And that was one of the first times that I ever saw him. And I said, boy, I wish I was as good as that guy. You know, I have to learn something from him. I'll watch him and see what he does, and I'll try to do those things. But I never did quite master it the way he did, but I learned a lot from him, really, in stage presence and working on the microphone. I think maybe the way they got started with the Dismembered Tennesseans group was, and I'm sure Fletcher Bright can give you more lowdown on this than I can, but they were all students at McCallie School, and they I think had a talent show or played at a program at some time at the school, and it just all snowballed from there. They got together and rehearsed for that show, and Fletcher will have to tell you more about the name Dismembered Tennesseans, but I think there was a band on the Grand Ole Opry, as I remember, was called Lost John and the Kentuckians or something like that, and United Kentuckians, and they were going to be the Dismembered Tennesseans, just as a fluke on the United Kentuckians band. I think that's the way it went, but anyway, it was something like that. But it was an unusual name that they had for a band, and probably he's answered that question a million times, you know, where that came from. But I think I've heard that story at some time down through the years, that it was kind of a spin-off of something that was going on the Grand Ole Opry, and they were a group called Lost John and the United Kentuckians, maybe, and then they said, well, we'll just be the Dismembered Tennesseans, and that's how they started that name and that band, I believe. And Fletcher Bright will correct me on that, I'm sure, if he sees this and it's not correct, he'll ask for time to come on the air and correct this story. But that's what I remember was that story.
That sounded better after you broke the string, don't you think? Well, thank you so much there, friends. And for those of you out in the radio audience who don't have an opportunity to see tonight, we always like radio audiences because we don't have to look all that good when we get up here. I have just broken the string on the old guitar, but it doesn't take long to get geared back up. Yeah, here, you be tuning that thing for me. I don't want the people out in the radio audience to have to listen to that thing wind up. It hurts your teeth there, and I think we could spare them with that. There, the Peter Jennings show, we played our hearts out for it. We did some of the greatest songs that I thought we'd ever done. And then when it came on TV, the only thing they had of us was a shot of us jumping up in the air, which I felt like was sort of not quite what we had in mind, and certainly not what we wanted to be discovered doing. I did get one telephone call out of the whole mess, and it was from a creditor who said he had not understood that I was doing so well and thought maybe now was time for us to talk. But here we are, we're back again, and we have with us Fletcher Bright, who is going to sing the lead on this next song. I don't know how many of you would have guessed it, but there is not a single member of this band up here who has had any formal vocal training. I think of the whole band, though, probably Fletcher Bright has had the least vocal training of any of us. And he is going to come up here and demonstrate how someone with seemingly no talent at all can get up in front of a microphone, and if you just turn it up loud enough, it'll sound passable. We're going to do one that Fletcher's going to sing the leads to. It's that old favorite entitled The Rank Stranger.
They were forever on stage making fun of one another, and Frank, of course, being doing the MC work, he got to make fun of everybody. They, probably said very little about him, but he had the opportunity to cut them all down to size. And he worked on Ed Cullis all the time because Ed was short. He was probably the shortest musician in the town. And they were, at one time I remember he was talking about getting him a Coca-Cola flat to stand on so he'd be up even with the rest of the band. But they were forever kidding each other, and he always said that Ansley Moses was the only musician on the American stage that was completely tone deaf and could not hear a thing. And then Fletcher, he ridiculed Fletcher about and I remember when this took place, it was called, I think, the Southern States Fiddle Championship, the whole Southern United States Fiddle Championship, and it was held at Raccoon Mountain over around Lookout Mountain. And the day of that festival, I went down there, and it was raining so hard, everybody got stuck, and most everybody left. And Fletcher wound up being the Southeastern United States Fiddle Champion And Frank always said it was by virtue of just the grace of God and the fact that there were all the fiddle players left except Fletcher and one or two more guys, and that's all that was there. So Fletcher was better than the two of them, so he got the Southern States Fiddle Championship.
I do want to introduce real quickly the band to you. Down on the far end is none other than the Southern States Fiddle Champion, the fellow who, but for the grace of God and two pretty sorry fiddle players, would have come in dead last at the Fiddle Championship down at Lake Lanier only 2 years ago, but more recently is the Dunlap Coke Ovens Fiddle Champion, Fletcher Bright. That's not necessary. That's not necessary. None of our other crowds applauds at that point, and I don't know why we ought to expect you to. He's, as I told you before, since winning the Southern States Fiddle Champion back in the early 70s on a cold and rainy day down at Crystal Cave in Alabama, why, he's been through a whole series of fiddle championships, and quite disappointing, I might add. And until the Coke Ovens Championship here about 3 or 4 months ago, he had been served up an unusual dose of humility by fiddle judges all over this part of the country. And so most people would have thrown their fiddle away by now, but not Fletcher Bright. Standing on my immediate right in that bright red shirt is the only legally deaf entertainer on the American stage today, our lead singer, the mayor of the town of Lookout Mountain, Tennessee, Mayor, His Honor, the Mayor Moses. My name is Frank McDonald, and I'm wearing a brand new hat. It was given to me out of appreciation by this band only at Christmas time. I don't know how good a hat it is. And I won't know until they get it out in a good hard rain sometimes and see how the thing holds up. But so far, seems like a pretty good hat, and I'm deeply indebted to the band for their expression of confidence here. I do most of the talking, and I'm sorry about that, but you'd be hearing a lot more music otherwise. Got little Doc Cullis, the shortest 5-string banjo player here tonight, I'm sure. Doc... hard for the folks out in radio land to appreciate how short Doc is. We keep Doc around figuring that if it ever gets to where he can't play his banjo anymore, we'll give him a flat top haircut and use him for a coffee table.
I think he did a lot of things for the community, as well as the band that was always doing a benefit show for some charity, and they were constantly doing good works, and of course that always goes a long way, you know. I mean, when you're in that kind of business, it helps you get additional work, but it's also you're doing something to help somebody else, and he did a lot of that, and Fletcher still does too. Fletcher does it too, but they just had a wonderful camaraderie amongst them, and they just stayed together for so long just because they enjoyed each other as persons, and even though it seemed like they'd get on the stage and be digging at each other about stuff, they were really just doing it in fun, and that's what I think the audience picked up on, the fact that these guys are just having a good time. They're just having a good time, and they want us to have a good time. I liked him, and he was a very likable person, and he was, I use the term loosely, I guess, but he was a character. He was just one of these people you meet in life that he was just a character. You know, and people like to talk to him. And I used to go down and visit with him at the Free Press, and especially after he had started the ALS, and he always, and I never thought about it at the time, but he had asked me, would I scratch his back, or scratch his neck, or somewhere that he couldn't reach. He was itching. He wanted, if you could scratch my shoulder for me right there. If you can do that for me, he said, I'll buy you lunch one day. But he was just that kind of person. He's somebody you like to stop and see and talk to, and always, I would say, regardless of the situation he was in, he was always upbeat. I mean, he made you feel good when you left, you know. And so I'm not surprised that this many years later, that he's still, people think a lot of him.
Well, thank you so much there, friends and neighbors. Thank you so much. And as that fine applause slowly dies away, I got to admit that there are people running for president of the United States of America today with a whole lot less encouragement than you've just given us. And I want you to know that from the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate it.
You mean you're not going to do Keep on the Sunny Side, your closing theme? I've never seen the Dismembered Tennesseans walk off the stage and not do their theme song.
I thought the old clock on the wall was telling us to get on out of here, but
it is. But this might.
Before we do, we want to suggest any of you that would like to come backstage for autographs. Well, certainly somebody back there will be available. We'd like
your
to
autograph.
These folks back here will give you an autograph if you'd like. We want to tell you that we don't think of it as goodbye, but just so long until next time. And until we see you again, each and every one, we'd like to remind you. Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on that sunny side of life. It'll help you every day to brighten all the way. Keep on that sunny side of life. Keep on that sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on that sunny side of life. It'll help you every day, brighten all the way. Keep on that sunny side of life.
That's all the time we have for tonight's Coke Show, folks. Don't forget tomorrow to pick up Coca-Cola Classic at your favorite supermarket or convenience store. Coca-Cola Classic, the official drink of the Mountain Opry. Coca-Cola Classic, still America's favorite soft drink, and proud to be a sponsor of the world-famous Mountain Opry. This is WDOD AM and FM, Chattanooga.